Story 1. About 20 years ago, I was driving home from a late wedding DJ gig. I was driving south on a major interstate which was relatively empty at 2:30 a.m. or so. At one point, in the Narrows, the retaining walls on each side get very high as the highway snakes underneath overpasses. Out of nowhere, a young woman jumped down from the retaining wall onto the highway and directly in front of my car. I hit the brakes hard, came to a complete stop, and nearly slammed into her. She looked up, ran to my passenger door and got in looking terrified. She looked between 16 and 20 years old, long blonde hair, and her clothes looked a little dirty. Not homeless dirty, but like she'd fallen down a few times. "I just need to call my mom," she said. I tried to calm her down and began moving back down the highway, and behind me about 50 feet, I see another figure jump down onto the highway out of my rearview window. I didn't mention this to her and she didn't look back or see the other person. I sped up and went about 4 or 5 exits south. She kept saying over and over, "I just need to call my mom." This was before most people had cell phones, so I told her I would take her to one of the hour grocery stores and she could call her mom. I asked her if she needed money for a payphone, what was wrong, etc. She said nothing other than, "I just need to call my mom." I pulled up to the grocery store and stopped. She got out quickly but not running, then ducked into the grocery. She didn't say a word to me or look back. I pulled into the gas station across the street and called and told them the entire story and let them know the young woman was inside the grocery store and a description of her. I have no idea what happened. I don't know why she did that, what happened to her, who the figure behind us on the highway was. Nothing. Really made me super uneasy. I think I did the right thing. I would have tried to do more, but she seemed really fragile emotionally and somewhat afraid of me. I am a guy. So I wanted her to just be able to get to where she needed to be. Story 2. I was driving home from a friend's late one evening, probably around 3 a.m. The town I live in and grew up in has a reputation for being a racist area thanks to a few high-profile incidents and a reasonable amount of racist idiots having lived here in the past. As I approached the town, I was going round a roundabout when a car joins, ignoring my right-of-way and cuts me off a bit. It was a shit bit of driving, but I'm reasonably good at not letting that get to me. What was mildly irritating, though, was given how keen the driver was to get out onto the roundabout in front of me. He then drove about 5 miles per hour below the speed limit on the way into the town, and like I said, it's late and I just want to get to bed. About a mile later, we reach the main street of the town, which has many turnoffs, and I'm still sat behind them. They pick one of the quieter turnoffs, which is the one I usually use to get home. At the end of that street, they can go left or right and still end up at the other end of the housing estate. They choose right, which is where I need to go. Then they have a few turnoffs in both directions before hitting another main road. They choose the quietest turnoff, I presume, thinking I'm following them and wanting to see if I actually am, or if I'm just making my way into the main road. Unfortunately for them, they've turned onto my road. They're crawling along it at this point, obviously slightly worried. The driver probably thinks I'm still pissed about being cut off, and I'm following him for some sort of revenge. So they decide to pull in and let me pass. They indicate and pull across a driveway which just happened to be mine. I had to pull alongside them and open my passenger side window. The driver opens his, and there's twominous 3 black teenagers in the car, all looking slightly terrified by the pretty big skinhead, not by choice, white guy who has been following them and now pulled up alongside them in the middle of a quiet estate in an area known for being racist. The look of relief on his face when I said, "Sorry, mate, that's my driveway you're blocking there," was pretty hilarious. Poor kid was scared shitless, but somehow, in trying to get rid of me, made a series of road choices that convinced him he was about to be murdered. Story 3. I was driving along this road that stretches out over about 100 kilometers. It was almost 1 a.m., and I was at the end of the road that is very desolate. Neighbors were kilometers apart from each other. It's a familiar route for me. I drive on it once every few months just to go anywhere. Because of how isolated it is, there's no street lights, so you have to rely on your car headlights. On this particular night, I was feeling a little strange because the route didn't seem familiar, which is impossible because it's just one long road with the occasional turning roads. But I kept driving along towards the place where I turn around. I canned to this certain point in the road where there was one lone house. Their car was parked in the driveway, and I could see that there was somebody in the passenger seat. I thought it was kind of weird because it was so late early. As I got closer to them, they turned the car on and flashed their high beam lights at me. I didn't pay much attention to this, but then I drove past them and looked into my rearview mirror to see what they were up to. They pulled out of their driveway onto the road going the same direction I was. I was a little nervous at this point because it still looked unfamiliar to me. About 5 minuets up the road, I looked into my rearview mirror and the car that pulled out behind me was gone. I looked to my left and noticed an abandoned convenience store on the side of the road. This was something I remember driving past whenever I would drive up here, and I remember that directly in front of the store. A couple of feet away there's a phone booth. Both the store and the phone booth were run down and covered in graffiti. Neither had been used in a very long time. As I got closer, I saw that there was a dark figure behind the glass of the phone booth. They were looking right at me. I could see their eyes in my headlights. I got a little closer, and they stepped out of the phone booth and started walking towards the road that I was on. I started to speed up, and then this really bright light came on behind me, and this person just took off towards the back of the store. I looked in my rear view mirror and saw the car that had flashed at me earlier. It was about 100 meters behind me. It followed me for another kilometer or so until we reached a turn-off road where it did a U-turn and went back the other way. To get home, I had to go back the way I came. I drove past the phone booth and there was nothing there, and then I reached the house where the car pulled out and it was back in its driveway. Driver still in the front seat. One night, I was out with my cousin just running around. I realized this car had been behind me for a long time and at first was thinking it was a cop, but I was able to determine it definitely wasn't. I started making oddball turns into random neighborhoods, and the car followed me every turn. I literally made a circle of rights, and the car made every right. I still don't know what possessed me to do what I did next, but I told my cousin I'm turning right, and if this car turns with me again, I'm going to do something stupid. I turned right, the car turned right with me, and I immediately turned hard into a gravel parking lot, ripped the e-brake and spun my car around 180 degrees. The car following me immediately whipped around and I started to chase them. I followed them for about a mile until they turned off into an area known for drugs, violence, and gang activity. Another time, it was 6:30 a.m. or so. I was on my way to work on a lane highway. Cruise set at 65, 2 trucks pass me in the left lane doing 75 or 80. Then one moves to the right and the other car stays in the left a little further back and both start slowing down. I'm a very visual driver, always looking ahead, so I backed off the throttle immediately. They slowed more, and again, not sure what possessed me to do it, but I then hammered the throttle, whipped around the guy in the left lane, and kept my foot down till I lost sight of them. To this day, I have no idea what the intent of either situation was, but I wasn't about to find out. Story 5. I don't often travel at night on my own, because I live in country with a high crime rate. If I travel at night, it is usually with other people, or it is because I have to. The scariest thing that happened to me was when I was a student driving a Mini. I had a friend with me, a girl. I was about 18 at the time. The problem with this Mini was that for some reason, you could not lock it from the inside. It was an old car. You had to get out and then use the key to lock it. It was a fantastic car though, with a lot of power. I had no problems going up a fairly steep hill in 4th gear. What happened was that we stopped at a traffic light. Town was fairly quiet. The next thing was there was a man at my car window trying to talk to me. He was a stranger and older than I was. Instinctively, I just drove through the red traffic lights because I knew he could open that door if he wanted to. There was nobody around as it was late. I drove fast and he went and got back in his car and followed me. There was a second traffic light, also red, and I drove through it turning left and then headed straight to a place where I knew people and possibly police would be. He did not follow me. It might have been completely innocent. But I was not about to hang around to find out. I told my parents about the incident. They said nothing. Within a week, they sold that Mini and my mother gave me her car to drive for a while. It was a car that did lock from inside. It might have been an overreaction by my parents. But then again, my mother had an experience with me as a child that I have no conscious recollection of. She told me we were at the local small shop that sells all kinds of things waiting in the car park, and there was a strange man watching. She instinctively made sure the back door where I was sitting and nearest this man was locked. In seconds, that man grabbed the outside door handle and tried to open it. But he couldn't. He then ran off. It happened so quickly, my mother said. It was just seconds and he was gone. I was very young, so I have no recollection whatsoever. I heard about it, though, when this later incident happened to me. The men involved were different races, so it was definitely not the same person. I think what you can take from these experiences is that you cannot be too careful with girls.